And if you're paying those kind of taxes, you're going to need advice. Cory O'Neill is a tax attorney. He runs his own legal firm in New York City. I asked him about this proposed super tax and how it compares to other high tax rates we see in Europe.
Well, at this point, I mean, if you view the French super tax as a tax on the employee's income, certainly that's the highest tax that I'm aware of in Europe. Austria has a top tax rate of 50%. That's a little bit different in that it's a progressive rate system, but it's much less. Austria's 50% rate applies to workers earning over 60,000 euros rather than 1 million. You know, whether it's worked or not, I think higher tax rates definitely increase the incentive for workers or businesses to find ways to minimize their taxes, you know, either through tax planning or through, you know, tax outright evasion. So I think countries have to find the right balance between, you know, marginal tax rates, you know, the need to raise revenue, and potentially, you know, incentivizing bad behavior.
I guess my question is there an example of a country that has relatively high tax rates? We don't have to use 75% as the marker, but is there an example that it's good or bad for their overall economy? I know the U.S. had high taxes, but hey, that was in the early 80s.
Well, that's true. And I mean, you know, the U.S. had high taxes, you know, from between World War II and the early 80s. And, you know, there were periods of you know, there were periods of recession and periods of prosperity with those rates. And I think the same has been true in Europe. I think really the takeaway is that, you know, high tax rates are not a positive influence on the economy, but any country's economy is going to be driven by a lot of factors that have nothing to do with taxes as well. So I think it's hard to draw a clear cause-effect relationship between high taxes and, you know, the extent to which high tax rates will impact a country's economy.
Yeah. I guess here's one of my concerns. A couple decades ago, we weren't as globalized as a community. Today, you can work in London for half the year, you can work in Hong Kong for the other half of the year, and you can go visit New York every other weekend, and you work out of all three cities. So it's become more complicated, but also workers have become much more mobile as well. Doesn't this basically tell people who are making those types of incomes that, hey, you know what, you can just move to another place, make something similar, and not get this heavy tax? I mean, you'd have to really, really want to be in that country to pay that kind of tax, or for the company to pay it.
Well, that's true. I think, you know, every tax has to be kind of evaluated on its own merits. I think you could look at, if you use the French super tax as an example, the fact that the tax is paid by the company rather than by the employee really puts the decision on the company as to how they want to deal with it. I think, you know, any company that is affected by the super tax, for example, is probably going to do an analysis and make a determination as to how much it would cost them to comply to pay the super tax. And they'll also look at ways that they might be able to reduce it or avoid it, possibly by restructuring the way that they pay their executives, possibly asking some executives to take some form of deferred compensation or some other compensation package, or to the extent that certain employees don't need to be located in France, it's possible that companies might try to move people to another jurisdiction to avoid the tax. But I think each proposal or each tax that gets enacted sort of has to be viewed on its own merits.
Attorney Cory O'Neill, thank you.